Protests that began over prices and jobs in Iran have now turned into a global political flashpoint. For weeks, people have been on the streets in cities across the country. Iran's leaders say some protesters have real economic grievances, but they also accuse foreign powers of trying to turn the unrest into chaos.
ما اسناد و مدارک زیادی داریم که حاکی از دخالت هم آمریکا و هم اسرائیل در این حرکت تروریستی هست.
Governments around the world are taking sides, some backing Iran's leadership, others backing the protesters, and a few warning that the situation could even slide into war. So who is saying what, and why does it matter? Let's break it down. Inside Iran, officials are trying to walk a careful line. President Masoud Pezeshkian says his government is ready to listen to people who are struggling with rising prices and economic pressure. He admits that many Iranians have real grievances, but he also says the protests are being hijacked. He accuses the United States and Israel of stirring chaos and claims that some demonstrators are not protesters but rioters trying to destabilize the country.
و ما تصمیم داریم و تصمیم گرفتیم به هر شکل ممکن مشکلات این عزیزان حل کنیم. اینا یه دیرو در داخل و در خارج آموزش دادن، یه تروریستایی رو از خارج وارد کشور کردن، مسجد آتش میزنن. آمریکا و اسرائیل اونجا نشستن دارن به اینا درس میدن برید ما هم هستیم. همونایی که این کشور رو زدن و جوانا و کودکان ما رو کشتن الان به اینا دارن دستور میدن شما این کارو بکنید، ما هستیم، شما برید خراب کنید، ما هم میایم پشت سرتون.
Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi has echoed that message. He says Iran does not want war, but adds that Tehran is prepared for all options after President Trump threatened military action.
عملیات پیش‌دستانه در دستور کار ما قرار نداره. ما خواهان جنگ نیستیم، ولی برای جنگ آمادگی کامل داریم. حتی آماده تر از قبل از جنگ قبلی هستیم.
Iranian media say more than 100 security personnel have been killed so far. Opposition groups abroad claim hundreds of protesters have died. Neither figure can be independently verified. Now, the United States. Washington has taken a much harder tone. President Donald Trump has warned Iran not to use deadly force against demonstrators. He says the US military is reviewing very strong options. In a social media post, he wrote that Iran is looking at freedom and that America stands ready to help. Iran sees this as a direct threat, and it is one reason regional tensions are rising fast. Qatar steps in as a mediator. Officials in Doha say they are working behind the scenes to stop the crisis from escalating into open conflict. They warn that any war between Iran and the US would be catastrophic for the region and beyond. Qatar says diplomacy is the only way out. Israel, Iran's biggest regional enemy, has openly supported the demonstrations. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu praised what he called the courage of the Iranian people.
ישראל עוקבת בדריכות על הנעשה באיראן. הפגנות למען החירות התפשטו ברחבי המדינה. העם בישראל, העולם כולו, משתאה מול הגבורה האדירה של אזרחי איראן. ישראל תומכת במאבקם לחופש ומגנה בתקיפות את מעשי הטבח ההמוני באזרחים חפים מפשע. כולנו תקווה שהאומה הפרסית תשתחרר מקרוב מעול העריצות, וכשיום זה יגיע, ישראל ואיראן יחזרו להיות שותפות נאמנות בבניית עתיד של שגשוג ושלום לשני העמים.
The Israeli military says the protests are an internal matter, but also says it is ready to act if needed. That message has only deepened Iran's suspicions of foreign involvement. In the United Kingdom, senior ministers say new sanctions against Iran are likely. Some British politicians have even refused to rule out supporting military action.
The United Kingdom condemns in the strongest of terms the horrendous and brutal killing of Iranian protesters, and we demand that the Iranian authorities respect the fundamental rights and freedoms of their citizens. Huge bravery to protest and to speak out in the face of this oppression. And today, as the further reports have come through, the Minister for the Middle East at my instruction has summoned the Iranian ambassador to underline the gravity of this moment and to call Iran to answer for the horrific reports that we are hearing. And consistent too with Iran's state threats activities on UK soil,
the European Union says it is discussing additional sanctions. France, Germany, and the UK have jointly condemned the killing of protesters.
The heavy-handed and brutal response by the security forces is unacceptable and exposes a regime afraid of its own people. The EU already has sweeping sanctions in place on Iran, on those responsible for the human rights abuses, nuclear proliferation, and Tehran's support for Russia's war. And we are discussing on putting additional sanctions.
Germany's chancellor went further, saying that a government that survived only through violence is effectively finished.
Mich besorgen im Augenblick die Nachrichten über eine immer höhere Gewaltbereitschaft der Polizei, der sogenannten Revolutionsgarden in Iran gegen die eigene Bevölkerung. Ich will die Gelegenheit nutzen, noch einmal das Mullah-Regime aufzufordern, diese Gewalt sofort einzustellen. Wenn sich ein Regime nur noch mit Gewalt an der Macht halten kann, dann ist es faktisch am Ende. Ich gehe davon aus, dass wir jetzt hier auch gerade die letzten Tage und Wochen dieses Regimes sehen.
Spain has summoned Iran's ambassador and formally protested against the crackdown, calling for an end to mass arrests and lethal force. Japan has also urged Iran to stop the violence and settle the crisis quickly. China, Russia, and Turkey back Iran's position. China has warned against foreign interference and says national sovereignty must be respected.
中方希望并支持伊朗保持国家稳定。我们一贯反对干涉别国内政，反对在国际关系中使用或威胁使用武力。希望各方多做有利于中东和平稳定的事。
Russia has accused unnamed outside forces of trying to destabilize Iran and says it stands with Tehran. Turkey has gone even further. Its foreign minister claims the protests are being manipulated from abroad and has openly blamed Israel's intelligence services.
Biz komşumuz İran'da herhangi bir kaosun ortaya çıkmasını asla arzu etmeyiz. Tabii burada İran toplumunda ve devlet hayatında bazı sorunlar olduğunu da yok saymıyoruz. Ama bu sorunların çözülmesi İran Cumhurbaşkanı Sayın Pezeşkiyan'ın da ifade ettiği gibi İran toplumunun kendi öz dinamikleriyle gerçekleşmeli. İran devletinin kendi milli iradesiyle gerçekleşmelidir. Dolayısıyla dışarıdan yapılacak müdahalelerin daha da kötü sonuçlar doğuracağını, özellikle de İsrail'in kışkırtmasıyla, İsrail'in bir takım hedefleri çerçevesinde ortaya çıkacak bir takım müdahalelerin daha büyük krizlere, daha büyük sıkıntılara yol açacağını görüyoruz, öngörüyoruz.
The UN says it is deeply alarmed. Secretary General Antonio Guterres has called on Iran to show restraint and allow peaceful protest. The UN Human Rights Chief says reports suggest the death toll may already be in the hundreds.
We are horrified by the mounting violence directed by security forces and protesters across Iran, as reports indicate hundreds have been killed and thousands arrested. The killing of peaceful demonstrators must stop. The labelling of protesters as terrorists to justify violence against them is unacceptable.
Again, those numbers cannot be independently confirmed. What began as protests over the cost of living has now turned into a geopolitical crisis. The next few days could decide whether this unrest fades, deepens, or explodes far beyond Iran's borders.